Okay, so again, this is going to be just a casual conversation between us. There we go. All right, just between us, and I want to first start out by saying that how this presentation came to be. Okay, so I was I worked for Walgreens in the capacity as a district manager, as a director, and we basically hired anywhere from 7 to 12, 15 pharmacists a year. And we wanted to get these people in-house. They just became pharmacists in May to July, August every year. And we wanted to take them and we wanted to give them some training. We wanted to bring them in for a couple of days. And in that time frame, we're talking about things like customer service. We're talking about the StoreNet system, things that you guys are familiar with, Intercom Plus, et cetera. And there's a ton of things we want to touch base, legal stuff, liability, et cetera. And as the director, I said, well, I want just 30 minutes with them. And everybody's like, okay, you want to talk about customer service? I'm like, no, I really don't want to talk about customer service. They're like, oh, okay, well, you want to talk about, how the Intercom Plus system. So, because I'm a pharmacist as well. So multifaceted, it's kind of complex, but there's a lot of really wonderful things you can learn on it. I'm like, no, I really don't want to talk about the Intercom Plus system. Like, well, what do you want to talk about? I said, I want to talk about personal finance. I said, because my own personal story, I think, is compelling. It could potentially help these individuals that are coming into the real world with starting their careers, et cetera, getting off to potentially the right foot. At least this gives them some information. If they want to use it, that can help them. If they don't, that's up to them as well. So I just need 30 minutes. The presentation has evolved. I now give this presentation to SIUE students, pharmacy students, because I'm a member of the advisory board down there. Once a year. In fact, I've just scheduled it for December this year. And I usually give it with Heather, my friend that I used to work with at Walgreens as well. And it basically is going to be pretty much what you have. I every once in a while add some slides, take away some slides, et cetera. This morning I added one slide specifically to this. But big picture, how this evolved for me and why I felt like this was so incredibly important for those individuals that are starting out in their careers is because what happened to me growing up. So you see the house that's there, and that's just a cue for me to tell you the story. As a young man growing up in my family, there were 5 of us, basically 2 boys and a girl and my parents, and money was very tight. My dad worked, he was in the Navy, he didn't make very much money. He worked sometimes 2 or 3 jobs. My mom also was a housekeeper, but she primarily got some odd jobs, and we were always in the rears with monies, whether that was the bills, whether that was bankruptcy, which was filed probably 2 or 3 times. It was very, very stressful growing up. And I just thought that's the way normally money was. That's just the way it is. And, I guess that's just the way life is. And that's all I knew in my world. But one particular day when I was probably 10, 11 years old, my mom in just a neighborhood right next to where we live pulled up to this house, very similar to the house you see on the slide there. And she said, you see that house right there, Mike? And I said, yeah, Mom. And she said, those people never have to worry about money for the rest of their lives. This is before Lotto. Okay, well, Lotto didn't exist back then. And so I'm like, what do you mean? She said, they made some really great sound financial decisions a number of years ago. And today they're in a place where they just don't have to worry about money. So for me, my paradigm was money was just something you stressed about, you worried about. And my mom's opening up a whole new world to me. So this really piqued my interest, like what? And number 2 was, I want to figure out what this is about personal finance so I can potentially make some decisions for myself, so I can be in a place where I don't have to worry about money either. So that's how this evolved from the presentation that I gave to these students and my interest in this. What I did then was I graduated from pharmacy school. I went to college, went to pharmacy school. My first focus was passing my boards, of course. So the boards, I graduated in May, Mother's Day weekend, typically at Butler. I passed the boards. I took those at the end of July. And the first thing I did was I just started reading books. And I probably 5 or 6 books. It wasn't Japanese. It wasn't like, oh my God, there's these concepts. It was all pretty much some of the same principles, most of which are in this presentation. And it helped me to, first of all, starting out salary as a pharmacist today and back then, you're starting out pretty well ahead of most people that exit college. And it gave me some ideas for discretionary income that I could invest for the long term. That's kind of how I got started in this process. I'm making some mistakes, which I certainly made, and I can allude to those later on if you want. But what I can do now, the other fortunate thing is obviously I married your mom, Grace Ann, and she also was a pharmacist. Now she ended up actually working to where she stopped working when David was born. She went from basically when the kids were born, she started cutting her hours, and she ended up basically where she wasn't working at all. So there was just one income, but still that was more important to us than accumulating massive wealth. The family piece was incredibly important. And that brings me to the slide is, what is your goal? Okay. And what I mean by that is, if your interest is in financial independence, why would that be important to you? And it's not a question I want you to answer. It's a question I just want you to think about, right? There's a method to the madness here. And that gets me to my next slide, which I'll show you in just a minute. But I'm not here to say you should want to be financially independent. That's not my role for those students at SIUE. That's not my role for you guys. My role for you guys is, if that's something that appeals to you, and I'm not being sarcastic, so some people are like, no, I'll be fine. That's okay. But if it's something that appeals to you, this might be an avenue that can help you and assist you with this. It certainly worked really well for me and my family. That doesn't necessarily mean the next 50 years it's going to work for the people that do the route that I did as well, which is part of the reason for this message of financial literacy. What are you doing potentially to educate yourself in the realm of making money, or more importantly, in the realm of your money making money for itself and for you, versus you working for the money itself specifically. So I like to put this in the front to say what I and my goals and aspirations aren't necessarily yours, but if this is something that appeals to you, I want you to think about why that is important, okay? And that brings me to the slide that I added actually 15 minutes ago, and that's purpose. I think it's so important to think about, or try to tap into, what you're here on this earth for. And this is this may get a little woo-woo for you guys or anybody watching the video, but it's important to understand, or try to understand, what that means to you, underlying all the other fluff that's going on and the distractions that happen in our life, especially as you're talking about potentially accumulating wealth and making a difference in that capacity. As you think about what you're doing in your jobs and your role. So David and I and Michael and I have had a number of conversations about, find something that gives you joy and let's let the money take care of itself, right? It's not about, well, whatever pays the most out there, I'm going to do that job. That can certainly the money can give you joy to a certain extent. That's only going to go so far. And potentially that's going to be a ladder that you're not going to want to lean up against this building of economic wealth. So this slide really is just to think and be intentional about trying to find what your best bet and your best decision of what you think your purpose is. And certainly between 18 years old and 24 years old, I certainly didn't have that figured out. I actually really started tapping into this about 15 years ago for myself personally. But when I felt like I had some clarity of why I was here, getting out of bed was not a problem in the morning, right? I'm typically an early morning person, but I was very highly motivated to say, well, this is what I think my purpose is. And man, I was so in tune with that. So it lined up to what I was doing with my job, and lined up what was going on with my family. All my values lined up as well. So this is a little bit of a soapbox moment where I stand on this to say this is important, but I just want you to think about it, whether you're watching this online or whether you're watching this as a recording for you guys later on. It's important. And if you don't have that clarity today, certainly not the end of the world, but focus and intention on that, I think, is incredibly important for what you want to do in life in general, and especially as it relates to making money. I like to put this slide in here about communication, because even though I was really focused with my intention on what I wanted to do with my money, obviously, as I make a decision, I have a partner in life, the beautiful Grace Ann on the slide there, and then kids, those decisions are really about communication, the influence that she had on me and my spending, I had on her and her spending and saving, and what's going on with the kids. So this message is really, this isn't just a straightforward, this is my plan, this is what I'm going to do, unless you're a single person and you have no friends and family in your life, which of course you guys will have to a certain extent. Those things need to be thought about, as you're going through life, etc. And so my own personal opinion is it's pretty much an open book with my communication with my wife. And even though she's cool with what's going on with the money, she doesn't really want me to report to her. I really want to let her know, hey, on a quarterly basis, this is where we're at in assets. This is where we're at in debt. This is where we're at XYZ. Just to make sure that she's engaged and she knows what's going on in the process of making decisions, what's going on with the kids' education, how are we saving for this, all those things proactively happening. It's just not me on the ship, master of the ship. This is a family unit here. I think communication is incredibly important in that process as well. So your advantage, so all three of you obviously listening to this here live with me, you have such a huge advantage that you have because your youth and what this could potentially mean for you in the future. And I'll show you some slides that pretty much nail this out. But for Michael specifically, annual salary, right? The intentional accounting of this presentation is he's getting in the real world. I gave this presentation to both Christina and Marissa last year, like I said, both of which are pretty much entering the real world within a year of each other. What can you do potentially with your earnings and what you're going to do to educate yourself to understand some of the basic concepts of personal finance to help and support yourself in the future? Huge advantage. If I'm giving this presentation to a 45-year-old person, it's not too late, but it's probably a little bit of a different presentation for obvious reasons. So there's the law of cause and effect that I added a couple of years ago to this presentation because I think it's important to think about what this could mean for you in this presentation. So just having, I know David seen some of these slides before. Have you seen this slide? Okay.
I mean, maybe, I don't remember.
Okay, so I just would like to open up to you guys. What do you think the law of cause and effect means? What do you guys think?
You do something and then something happens because you did something.
That's exactly right. So you nailed it 100%. So give me the example. It could be anything, right?
I don't take a shower in the morning.
Yeah.
I'm going to smell pretty bad during the day.
That's a perfect example, right? Yeah. So the cause is I'm not showering. The effect is a smelly body, right? So that's something you didn't do, right? Let's talk about law of cause and effects is something you did do. That's a perfect example, but let's talk about actions, right?
You want an example?
Sure.
Okay. If I stand up and punch Michael in the face, then he's going to stand up and punch me right back in the face.
Maybe.
Right. There's going to be a lot of effects. Dad's probably not going to be happy, right? So yeah, so exactly. The reason I bring it up is because sometimes we don't forward think about the cause, right? So in this presentation, this exact same slide is at the end of the presentation. And I'm going to ask all three of you to share with me some ideas, I'm not going to ask for commitments or next steps or goals, but some ideas of possible causes that you could have that if you're interested in having some financial success in your future, what could be that cause that causes the effect of personal finance or you're successful in personal finance in the future. So just kind of think about that. There's a lot in here, et cetera. So that's the law of cause and effect. All right. We get a little bit into compounded interest. Albert Einstein, the guy on the slide there, he had a number of amazing quotes. These are just two of those. The value of money and time. So compounded interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it. The most powerful sentence in there is he who doesn't pays it. Okay. Because this is what we do in our lives. We don't understand it and we pay that and we don't know really what's happening, right? So obviously there's power in understanding and earning it, but so many people in this world, America, you name it, they don't understand the power and they pay it, unfortunately, for somebody else. The other thing is the most powerful force in the universe is compounded interest. Just a blanket statement that he said, people need to understand what this can do for them for the long term. So just some examples of compounded interest. A 25-year-old person, $1,000 in savings at 6% interest rate would grow to $10,000. So it's going to go tenfold in 40 years. The same $1,000 with 12% interest rate would grow to $93,000. So just $1,000, you don't add any money to it. It just sits growing at a compound interest rate of 12% a year. So how much would it be if the interest rate was 18%? For 40 years, just $1,000 sitting in a bank of 18%.
Are we guesstimating?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go with $550,000.
$550,000. Anybody else?
Um,
I don't remember the answer, to be honest with you.
I'm good with David's guess. That's pretty nice.
I'll go with your.
Any
Yeah,
other?
that was good.
All right. $750,000.
Wow.
Close though.
It was close. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was 300 something, but obviously just $1,000 for 40 years, 18% return on investment, compound interest, that turns into $750,000. Again, it shows you the power of compound interest. Here's another one. 25 years old, investing $100 per month at 12.5% interest rate return. When you're 65 years old, you would have over $1 million. So just $100 a month. If you wait 10 years instead of 25, you start at 35 years old and you go to 65 years, how much money would you have? So basically you just delayed that interest for 10 years of compounding.
Let me say you're gonna have 600,000.
Okay, so from 1 million, you go all the way to, you lose $400,000. I think that might be a pretty good guess. Anybody else?
What do you think?
Yeah, 500 or 600,000.
Okay, 500 or 600?
I'll go with that.
All right. So you have only $319,000. So that's what you got, right? At 10 years with 10 years to go. And then over the course of those 10 years at 12.5%, it grows to $1 million. So of course, the guess is to start early. The difference is $750,000, $741,000 less by starting 10 years later. So the story of Terry and Jerry. David knows the story.
I do.
Michael, have you heard the story?
I've not heard
I'm
this.
so excited. Have you heard the story now? Okay. So this is Terry and Jerry. Obviously, Terry's on the left and Jerry's on the right. So they're back in the day, they're two 22-year-old twins, Terry and Jerry, and they decide to start saving for retirement. Terry opens an individual retirement account. And this is just money you can put into Fidelity or Schwab or what have you that grows over the course of the lifetime of the fund that you have to wait till retirement to pull it out. And it grows interest free. Basically, it just grows, and there's no tax on it until you take it out. Okay. So Terry opens this individual retirement account, invests $2,000 a year over the course of 6 years. And then just in this example, he just stops. Her IRA compounds at 12% a year. So she just stops putting the money in there, and it just basically just continues to build. It's like that in the bank or what have you. It's just building at 12% a year. Okay. So she goes for 6 years. So Terry, even though they had this dinner at 22 years old, he waits and doesn't open his IRA until that 7th year when she stops. In this year, this is the year his sister stops. So Jerry then contributes his $2,000 a year for 37 years. He too earns the same rate because it's the exact same fund at 12% a year. At age 65 years old, they decided to go back out for dinner to compare their IRA holdings. How much money is in this account? Jerry, who is fully aware that his sister stopped contributing 37 years earlier, is confident that his IRA will be worth at least 10 times as much as Terry's. So at 65 years old, who has more money? Does everybody understand what's going on here?
Yes.
Okay. So at 65-year-old, Terry or Jerry have more money.
I'm going to assume Terry has more money.
Okay. Anybody else?
I know the answer, so I'm not gonna say.
Okay.
I'll just say Jerry has one.
Jerry
Just
money.
devil's advocate. over
Very
here.
cool. Love it. They actually have about the same amount of money. At age 65, investing just $2,000 a year, they would both have approximately $1.2 million. Terry invested just $12,000, which is $2,000 for 6 years, compared to her brother Jerry, who invested $74,000, $2,000 years over the course of 37 years. How do they come out even? How does that happen? What do you guys think?
Compound interest.
Okay, compound interest is correct. So how did that work with Terry, who invested only $12,000?
Well, she did it earlier than Jerry.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. So she did it earlier than Jerry. And you can see on the left, Terry, the green is where she invested, and the right is where Jerry invested, right? Where she invested for those first 6 years, her money, to your point, Michael, was making that payment and that compound interest of $2,000 a year. Does that make sense to everybody? So another powerful way that you can see how just starting early and taking advantage of that process can help you. So this is a commercial that was out in probably 10 years ago, and I'm not being sponsored by Prudential or anything like that, but I love the concept of this commercial. I think it's about 30 seconds, but it shows the power of what compound interest can do when people take a little bit of change and set it aside for compound interest.
We asked people a question. How much money do you have in your pocket right now?
I have $40.
53.
21?
Do you think the money in your pocket could make an impact on something as big as your retirement?
Not a chance. I don't think so.
Probably not.
It's hard to imagine how something so small can help with something so big. But if you start putting that toward your retirement every week and let it grow over time, for 20 to 30 years, that retirement challenge might not seem so big after all.
So I bring this up, obviously the power in seeing those dominoes fall and everything else was a little bit bigger, and then at the end you have this huge amount. And I think sometimes we consider that we're going to eventually have those big piles, but in reality, that's what you're going to miss if you start late, right? You go from 2022 to 2052, but if you don't start early, you do get the compounded interest, but it starts from 2032 to 2052. And you can, just like in those examples I showed previously, and that's why we get the sad face. That's what that little thing in the middle there is, a sad face. When you miss the opportunity to capitalize in those last 10 years. But I always want to finish, of course, with a happy face to say that if you do it and you start early, it's amazing what that money can do to grow for you. Any questions about that example? Pretty straightforward. All right. So I always like to bring up the process of Social Security. So will it be around when you retire? Usually I have people get out their phones and just Google when will Social Security, how long will it last? And I think the last time when I gave this presentation last year with Heather, I think the statement was, yeah, it looks like it's going to be around for the next 14 years or so. In reality, I believe the government will listen and say, okay, it's gone now. It'll probably start to wane as far as the actual benefit that goes there and begin to diminish. I don't know exactly what that looks like. The government does a lot of different things between printing money and all kinds of stuff. But the reality is, I don't know that I would necessarily bank on the fact that you're going to have Social Security. I never have really counted on that. Hopefully it'll be there in the next 10 years or so when I officially start tapping into that. When I'm 56 right now, when I'm 67 or so, but I don't really count on it for being there, and I certainly wouldn't recommend you guys being significantly younger than me of counting on that. The value of money, again, 30 years. I always like to look at what's really happened in the last 30 years. This is fairly up to date. I gave this presentation a few months ago to another group, a family, and I ran the numbers. So $1 back in 1992 in the Standard & Poor's grew to almost $18 by 2022. That's just investment in the market. Again, the future isn't necessarily what's going to happen as far as what happened in the past, but the goal is to start early. Ignorance can be very expensive. And it's not just about retirement. As we've given this presentation to these students, they've given us other feedback to say, let's not just focus on retirement. What are other things we can do that are good, sound financial decisions? So those three categories are emergency funds that I want to talk with you guys about, credit card debt, and purchasing a new car versus a used car. But before we get into that, are you guys familiar with the 24-hour rule?
I am, because sometimes mom likes to employ it when we are thinking about big decisions. You know about this?
I mean, I can make a guess.
Okay.
What would your guess be?
My guess would be, I mean, in the case of like buying something, especially if it's expensive, you should wait 24 hours before you actually buy it.
Yeah, before you actually make that decision. So it's just such a great rule or concept to think about when we try to sometimes make impulsive decisions where, oh man, if I would just wait and just give my time to think about it, you can still do it. But if you just give yourself 24 hours to think it through, to process this major decision, and that could be cars, I mean, there's any number of things there, but delaying that gratification, which typically most people are not very good at doing, is a good process, which you can do as an exercise. So the first concept that I wanted to share with you is just about emergency funds. So to you, Michael, as you're starting your career, especially in the beginning, you want to start with a real small mini emergency fund initially, where it helps you to prevent going into debt. When things happen, right? It's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's really about when it's going to happen. And to start out with, especially since you're just starting your career early, you really want to work up to around $1,000 with what's called a mini emergency fund. It helps prevent debt challenges with financial challenges, covers things that aren't budgeted for, car repairs, medical costs, loss of employment, gives you some peace of mind, and then you can use the money in a money market account. And basically it'll just be less accessible. And this is something that I've done for many, many years, is I've bankrolled dollars to set aside for emergencies, or set aside for the taxes we pay on the house, or set aside for the insurance payment that I make on a yearly basis for all of our insurance. That's a mini emergency fund. Then you want to get to where you actually have a true emergency fund, which is 3 to 6 months of expenses. Should always, if you can, in the beginning, have these expenses of liquid savings. So again, life will happen. What happened with so many Americans with COVID? People lost their jobs. I mean, this slide was made way before that. We just never know. 75% of families have a major negative financial event in their lifetime. Mindset should be when it happens, and be prepared for not if it happens. For me, the biggest thing that this gives me is just peace, right? It gives me peace of mind knowing that, yeah, that could happen, but I have extra $10,000 in an account that if that happens, I can pull the trigger and we're going to be just fine. This is something that I've worked through with Mom's help since we've been married, just knowing that life is going to happen, things are going to happen, and it's been really helpful in that process. So that's one category, is emergency funds. Credit card debt. The average credit card debt, this is a little bit outdated, but June of 2019, the average US household had almost $10,000 in credit card debt. Paying the minimum payment each month takes over 30 years. The average rate is over 18% interest, but that's just an example of 18% interest. 60% of people do not pay their credit card debt early or often at once, and 69% of the people who filed for bankruptcy and credit card debt basically said that was the reason for the bankruptcy. And I can assure you that was one of the biggest reasons my parents filed for bankruptcy as well. So again, not necessarily do what I do, but this is something that we've always we know we're going to use our credit cards, which is a slippery slope as far as usement, because you're going to probably spend more money if you use credit card because it's so accessible. But just know that you probably should be paying off your credit card on a monthly basis. Should be something that, well, I got $10,000 in credit card loans. This is great. I can go buy more furniture, etc. You want to try to space that out so you're not putting yourself in the credit card debt, because they're going to make a ton of money off of you on the interest alone. So a new versus used car. So a car depreciates in value significantly over the course of time. So in this example, I just have full price for a car, let's say, is $30,000, right? What happens over the course of 2 years that's now depreciated? You've lost about 10 grand just in 2 years course of time. So if you purchased a nice car that's 18 months old or 2 years old for $20,000, there's a significant difference in what you would owe on the car. The depreciation value, as soon as you drive it off the lot, comes down right away. So somebody that's working to be more financially responsible, I guess, if you will, with their money, would buy a car that's typically a year or two old, or in this example, it says 2 years old. So a full price of $30,000, if you get a 5% interest rate on that car for a 5-year loan, costs you $566 per month, or over the course of that loan, about $34,000, $33,960. If instead you buy, let's say, a Camry, 2 years old, for $20,000, so $20,700, 5% interest rate of 5 years is $391 a month, or $23,000. So again, $10,000 less paid for the car in 5 years. So you can see, just on a monthly basis for basically the same car, as long as you take care of it, you're spending a significant amount of money less for that car. The difference on a monthly basis is $175 in those examples that I showed you. So $175 times 60 months is $10,500, or $175 a month at a 10% interest rate for 5 years is $12,800. Let's just say you spent the same brand new car rate, but you put the $175 in a fund that was basically making about 12% or 10%. So that $12,800 that now you basically have a chunk of change at the end of the 5 years. What if you put that 30 years away? How much would that be? And you just let it sit there at 10%. How much do you think that would be? 12,800, 10% interest rate, 30 years.
A lot of money.
A lot of money, okay?
I'm gonna go with $96,000.
Okay. Mason?
I'm also gonna say a lot of money.
Okay. So if you take $12,800, which basically you just basically bought the same car, you spent the same amount of money, but instead you used $175 and put that in a fund, you have almost $250,000 just from that one decision alone in assets, because you took that additional money instead of putting it into that brand new car with a brand new car smell, and you put it into a fund. So significant just in that one decision alone. So the new $28,000 car will lose $17,000 of its value in the first 4 years that you own it. So 2 big hurdles to building wealth. One of those is ignorance, and that can be very expensive. That's probably the biggest message that I want you guys to come away from this presentation is educate yourself. Do not be intimidated. I have plenty of things at the end of this presentation, as well as books that any of you guys can borrow of just basic sound financial principles as it relates to money management and personal finance. It's definitely not rocket science, but if you don't know what you don't know, you can't do anything about it, right? And then the other thing is there's a lot of egos. There's a lot of people that want to keep up with the Joneses, and they want to have the nicest car and the nicest house and the nicest clothes. But in fact, the Joneses are also broke as well. So just be careful who you're trying to keep up with. Those are 2 big hurdles. So the other one is the challenge with inflation. So I added this last year, and unfortunately, this presentation is really a bad time right now. It's a good time to show you this slide, but it's really a bad time with inflation. So for years, the inflation rate has been about 2%, 1%, maybe 3%. And that's a nice low percentage rate. So if I have $1 million in the bank and the inflation is 2%, a year later, I basically just lost $20,000. If I have $1 million in the bank and the inflation rate is almost 10%, I just lost $100,000 and I didn't do anything differently, right? So inflation is something we want to keep tabs on. This is why we don't want to put our money under our pillow or under our mattress or under our beds, right? You have to put it in something that is growing over the course of time. It says inflation rate the past several years has been 2 to 3%. The value of the money goes down as the inflation rate goes up. A postage stamp, which costs 58 cents today, actually just went up the other day, only cost 6 cents in 1970, right? So 50 years ago. You have to invest your money to overcome that challenge with inflation. So the end of this presentation is just the 4 key principles of personal finance. This is certainly not the end all and be all, but these are things that I want to make sure that you guys are aware of. This is besides the last one, this is a really important one, is just pay yourself first. So pay yourself first, basically just obviously says start now, start early, and start making regular investments for yourself. This could be in the capacity of a 401k where you work, you're paying yourself through your 401k. This could be because you take money out of your regular paycheck and you put it aside in a money market mutual fund or something just for savings, which a lot of people do as well. It automatically happens. You don't have to worry about it. Instead of bringing $2,000 paycheck, you're bringing an $1,800 paycheck. $200 automatically goes aside for your savings. You can set up automatic payments. There's many brokerage firms that will do this for free, obviously because they want your money. The investment rule here is invest 15% of your money before your tax gross income annually towards retirement. So again, that's another way that you can do it. It could be a Roth IRA, it could be a regular IRA, or it could be like through your own 401k. Again, the same principle, live on less than you earn, make the accounts that you put your money in less accessible. So as I had said before, with those emergency funds or the funds I was setting up for myself for the taxes and the insurance that I pay every year, those are not my regular banking account. Those aren't my regular checking account. Those are funds that I actually have to get online, go through there, put a bunch of passwords in, and get that money transferred over. Because I got to jump through a couple of hoops, just the natural law of People want to do what's simplest and easiest. I don't necessarily do that. It's less accessible for me. You set up a budget and you stick to it to the best of your ability. You continue to tweak and adapt your budget over time. A budget is people telling their money where to go versus wondering where it went, which is from John C. Maxwell, a big leadership guru. One of the best things that a person can do instead of worrying about the budget is making a decision of how much money they want to put away. So if somebody makes $50,000 a year, like a teacher today, let's say they make $50,000 a year, a pharmacist today makes $100,000 a year. The teacher decides, you know what, I'm going to live on $40,000 a year, and they make it work, and they decide to put the $10,000 a year, which is a big chunk of change every year, whether that's to retirement, their 401k, their savings, etc. They make it work because they know they have $40,000 to work with, right? They don't have to do any budgeting at all because they know they have $40,000 to work with just by making that one decision. Now, I'm not saying they don't have to be budgeting, but as long as they're paying their bills on time, etc. The same thing goes with the person that makes $100,000 a year. They can say, I want to spend $10,000, I want to put aside, $20,000, I want to put aside. They make that one decision, everything else falls into place. If they don't make the decision to pay themselves first, guess what happens at the end of the month? They're out of the $100,000 for the year and they haven't put any money aside because they're going to spend basically what they're making. Okay, so you can set that up automatically to set yourself up for success. So, of course, always live below your means. This enables you to pay yourself first. Many people get this backwards. They spend and they save and invest what's left over, which is usually nothing. Principle number 2, no debt. So we really want to work hard to be free of debt. And I give this presentation, like I said, to students from SIUE, some of which are coming out of school with $100,000 or $200,000 in school debt alone. Not talking about credit card debt, not talking about car loans, not talking about a house mortgage, just flat out just from school itself. So the goal is to focus on taking care of that debt as hard and as fast as you can, and potentially balancing what you can do to help pay yourself first in the process as well. So my message to the students and to you guys as well is work very hard to be as debt-free as possible. School loans, credit card debt, car loans, etc. Focused or organized intentionality, put a plan together and work your plan. If you have to incur debt, try to do so with assets that appreciate. So what's an example of an asset that appreciates?
A house.
Correct. Yeah. So versus a car or clothes or food, things that you're going to have debt because of credit card debt that you potentially aren't going to be paying off. Principle number 3 is decrease your taxes. So you want to minimize your taxes. This is going to be your number one expense, depending on what tax bracket you're in, but probably going to be your number one expense. We want to minimize this as much as possible. So ways that you can do that: home ownership. Can anybody tell me how owning a home helps you to minimize your taxes?
You know, I don't know. I mean, I know you can depreciate it, but like, I don't think that's what you're talking about here.
Right. So home ownership, potentially the interest that you pay on your home versus paying a rental property for $900 to live in a rental property, or $900 for a mortgage and interest. The interest you pay, you can write that off and to help lower your taxes. Okay. 401k. So 401k is a program where you can invest your money through your employer, like Walgreens had one, and that money then can be put aside and saved as well. Can anybody tell me how a 401k helps you to decrease your taxes?
Is this whenever you take it out during retirement or no?
Yeah, that's what you take out when you're in retirement. That's exactly right.
And then whenever you take it out, do you not have to pay taxes for it?
You do have to pay taxes when you take it out as it grows. Right? Anybody else? So there's 2 ways. The money, let's say you put $10,000 in a 401k every year, right? In fact, let's look at this example right here. So you work as a teacher, you make $50,000 a year, and you decide to put 10% of your money as a teacher, and so $5,000 a year in your 401k. And many companies match up to a certain percentage, but let's just say in this example, they're matching $5,000. They're putting $5,000 in your own account, they're matching it. So not only did you just put $5,000 of money away, you actually put $10,000 of money away. And as we looked at those examples in the beginning of this presentation, Some pretty exciting stuff can happen with $10,000 you put away that's tax deferred. It's tax deferred, which basically means that next year, if you made 10% on this, you now have $11,000 in that account, because $10,000 times 10% is $1,000. You don't have any taxes on that 11% at this point in time, that $11,000 at this point in time, until you're 65 years old and you take it out. But the thing that's cool on it is that $11,000 is now compounded interest to make more money, right? So over the course of time, the deferment on that tax is continually happening, and instead of being pulled out, you're building more wealth. Does that make sense? That's called tax deferment. It's also tax deductible. So as you take $5,000 of your own money, you're not taxed as though you made $50,000 a year. You're taxed as though you made $45,000 a year. And as I give this presentation to pharmacists that are making 100 grand, it's nice to be taxed on $90,000 versus $100,000. That's what I share with them. So $10,000 per year in this example at 10% rate of return, what do you think that's worth?
$1,000 a year for 30 years at 10%. That is a lot of money.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot.
That's a lot of money. That's probably like $6 million. Wow.
So it's $1.6 million, investing $10,000 per year. So you actually invested, in this example, you just invested $5,000 per year, of course. So you doubled your rate of return, but your company automatically matching you bet 100% rate of return right away, instantaneously. But that $10,000 over the course of 30 years, $1.6 million in that person's 401k. And this, to me, again, is the most important principle. And this is just to educate yourself. There are a number of books here. There's a number of other books that I can read. I can recommend to you, but it can be very expensive by not taking the time and educating yourself. So I implore those students that I talk to, and I implore to you guys too, not necessarily today, maybe Michael, the next year or so, start sticking your nose or start asking your mom and dad or whatever to educate yourself, whatever you can do. Just like anything, this is not hard to understand. It just takes a little bit of time to learn initially. I don't feel like I'm an overly intelligent person. I'm probably just average intelligence. These books are written in plain everyday language, and there's some really amazing, and they're easy to read too, because like the Wealthy Barber is a story book. It's actually it's a story about personal finance, but it's actually a fiction book. But there's a lot of powerful themes and theories in that book. The Millionaire Next Door is another really good one. The Automatic Millionaire that I've read and listened to. And then, of course, a lot of Dave Ramsey stuff. He's got Financial Peace, which is on the screen, Total Money Makeover. And recently, David's read, and I'm about halfway through, The Baby Steps Millionaire, which is just another reinforcement of a lot of the same principles and concepts in this book. And these are just, again, available on Amazon, about $1, $2, $3, whatever. You can also borrow these from me. I have some of these actually on audiobook potentially as well. And then the last slide is, again, the law of cause and effect. So again, I'm not asking for a commitment. I'm just asking you to think about what you just saw and what potentially you could do to help, if you're interested, to help and support yourself with financial education, basically ultimately being in a place where you're financially independent, where just money is no worry, and you live just like in that house, that guy, where they made some pretty good sound financial decisions back in the day. What do you think comes to mind for you guys? Maybe what's one example from each of you?
Well, if we put in money now, doesn't have to be like a significant amount, but just like maybe like 10 to 15% of what you're making yearly into an account that's going to compound over time, then whenever you're 65, you'll be looking pretty.
Yeah, that's a great example of what you can do. Just to be intentional about putting that money aside to grow. It could grow in a savings, it can grow in a money market account, it can grow in a tax deferred account, an IRA, a 401k, depending on the company or business. That's a great example of something potentially that somebody could set up based on the principles of this presentation for the law of cause and effect. What else comes to mind?
I like the new car versus the used car one, which was, you getting pretty much the same car, just a couple years older, kind of trading in that new car smell for a couple $100 a month. And then if you choose to, put that $100 a month and let it grow over time, like in retirement or whatever else, then you literally have the exact same amount of stuff, but you end up with a lot more money in the end. I like that
Right.
example.
Cool. What do you think, Mason?
I don't know, what stood out to me a lot though, was the domino commercial there, I thought was really
Okay.
cool, but about just kind of, like Michael was saying here about like the 10 to 15%. And just that little bit early, how big that domino effect can really be over time.
Absolutely. Yep, very good. And the last slide is what you guys have for questions for me as it relates to the presentation, financial piece. What comes to mind for you guys?
So this is kind of just a random question, but did grandma know actually know the people in the house? Do you know? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I didn't know who they were. In some level, she knew them, but I actually bring this up to her to this day, and she doesn't remember that. She doesn't remember who those people were. She doesn't remember the conversation. But obviously, it really stuck out for me to have an opening to say, "Oh wow, this is interesting."
I mean, I think I'm gonna have questions in the future whenever I'm actually setting up these accounts, because I don't know how to set up these accounts, so I'm gonna need your help.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, actually, last summer, me and Christina worked to do this for her as well. So, and David's already set up some of the stuff for his own stuff too. So, of course, it's not a problem.
Yeah, a lot of it, I mean, wasn't that hard. I mean, I just remember when I was 16, I started getting a paycheck. I opened a brokerage account, which basically means you can like buy stocks or like whatever you want. And I just remember we set it up online and connected it to the bank, and I mean, it only took like a couple days to, for them to like verify everything. It's just very simple.
all right, easy.
Anything else?
So I have a question about how do you save money on taxes by having a house? Because don't you get taxed on like property tax?
You do. Yeah, it potentially is a wash depending on if the house is going to appreciate. Because your house, the house we live in now, hopefully is worth more than when we first purchased it. But the tax savings is the interest of the house itself specifically that you're paying on the mortgage versus paying somebody else's mortgage. Remember that Albert Einstein, he who doesn't pays it, right? So potentially it can help you. There are definitely scenarios where you're paying the same amount of money, whether that's your apartment that you're living in, depending on where you're in town. You're paying somebody else's mortgage, basically, is what you're doing in that process. So why not potentially pay that for yourself to eventually have a house that's free and clear, and you've gotten the tax advantage of being able to write off that insurance. So many years, Mom and I would be obviously owning a home or trying to own a home, paying years and years of mortgage, and we're able to take that, was it $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 in insurance or in interest, and then write that off with the help of our accountant through our taxes every year versus paying rent. So.
Gotcha.
Yep. Anything else? Good. Okay. Oh. There we go. So close.